you know what episode it is? You're gonna have to
No,
cut this out.
take it
Doesn't
away.
matter.
Yeah. It's
All
like
right, welcome
season
back.
three. Yeah.
Welcome back to the Coaching Collective podcast. Today we are joined by Richard Collins from the Physique Code. Obviously today we've got a few things and topics that we're going to chat on. Mostly about client mindsets and things like that. But if you want, Richard, take it away. Give us a little bit of an introduction. Tell us about yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Tell you about myself. That's always the hardest question to ask, or to answer. Um, yeah, essentially, I've been coaching in the fitness industry since 2000 and probably 2006, 2007. So I've been a while. I've worked in a variety of different sports, starting off in AFL, basketball, bodybuilding, obviously, which I'm doing a fair bit of now, general population. So I've sort of been around been around a multitude of different industries within coaching. Currently, I am in Perth. We've got a gym called the Physique Code where it's predominantly body composition. We do a lot of bodybuilding competitors, but we also do, general lifestyle people, helping them transform their body composition, get healthier. But yeah, it's essentially my background
Yeah.
for yeah, I guess everything.
Yeah. As far
Summary of it.
I was going to say, when you said you used to work AFL and basketball and all that kind of stuff, what was your, I guess, main position with them? So, like, what teams did you work for? What were you actually doing for them? All that kind of stuff.
Well, I did a good amount of work in Melbourne's VFL, which is for Perth people the equivalent of the waffle. And then I was working the teacher that I had when I did my course in Melbourne was working at Collingwood and Hawthorn Football Club as strength and conditioning coaches. So I was able to do quite a bit of work experience with him, and then go through and just sort of get a feel for what training with elite athletes was. And then obviously got to do a bit with because of Hawthorn with Box Hill Hawks. And then obviously my background is in basketball. So I was lucky enough to be able to get in and work with privately and within clubs, working for some of the semi-professional and professional basketball clubs, which essentially kicked off my coaching career. Like I was doing that before I was working at actually worked at Genesis in Doncaster. It was my first
Oh,
commercial gym that I worked at. Um, so yeah, so I was actually able to go through and do work experience for quite a long period of time when I was still studying in AFL and VFL and things like that. So I was really lucky in that regard. But it was obviously a very big difference between moving from working with those sort of athletes that are paid essentially to play to going with general population clients trying to lose weight. So it was very different, but it gave me a lot of experience on dealing with different athletes, and then just how to mentally sort of get across to them and try to bring out the best in them. But yeah, so essentially with the sporting world, that's how it started. I always say I'm very, very lucky that I was in a position that I was able to be able to do that and be able to work through those clubs and have that access to great coaches and great athletes and be able to learn. And I think that sort of helped kickstart my career in coaching, not just for sport, but for just being a coach and how to deal with people in general.
yeah. How'd you then fall into the bodybuilding realm? So, like, what was the main
Um,
sticking point for
so I
you?
had one person that wanted to do a bodybuilding show, and we did it. They did quite well. Um, and it's a funny bodybuilding is a funny industry, right? Because like if you do well with one person, it just kind of leads on with marketing to more. And I never actually intentionally wanted to do bodybuilding coaching, but I sort of fell into it. And then, the more I obviously wanted to help clients, the more I learned about it, the more I went into, getting different mentors to help out with it because that was the problems I was facing at the time is, learning how to do that to the best that I could. And I just sort of fell into it. And it's, we all know with coaching, it's like your referrals will come if you do well if you have a client do well in bodybuilding, you tend to attract more bodybuilding clients. And essentially I just kind of fell into it. I was constantly problem solving, trying to work out how to get my clients better. And it just kind of, I guess, just rolled on from there.
Yeah, I feel like with the amount of, I guess, experience that you've got through coaching like athletes at a top level as well, I guess that sort of leads into bodybuilding because I feel like it's not so much, I guess they're not, you wouldn't call amateur bodybuilders top athletes, but at the same time, like they're at a better level. And I feel like bodybuilding is very mentally demanding. And obviously, this was going to be the main topic of the podcast we wanted to run through, which was like the discussion of like client mindset within, I guess, prep, even just bodybuilding in general.
Mhm.
But like, how did you find as much of a difference when it comes to like when it came from those athletes to sort of anyone that does bodybuilding? Is it the same? Is it completely different?
In terms of like sports athletes versus,
Yeah. Like,
yeah, look, there are differences. Um, but it's very context and person dependent. So like there are some that are very similar and there are some that are polar opposites. I think like if we break it down and like to go a little bit deep in with mindset stuff on this, that like bodybuilding, a lot of people don't know anything about it until they get to like 17 or 18 years old.
mhm.
Um, Majority of the professional sports athletes have been playing all their life.
Yeah.
So I think one of the biggest differences is like there are some people that are bodybuilders that have never grown up playing competitive sport.
Yeah.
And then there are competitors that have. Whereas like I think when you're playing, football, basketball, those things, you learn a lot of lessons in being an athlete that maybe sometimes the bodybuilders don't have. Not all of them, but sometimes they don't have. Like for example, like learning how to win, learning how to lose, learning how to, you know, come back after a failure or come back after something hasn't gone their way and get better. Um, and generally at the elite level of professional sport, they're all quite good at that because they've had to deal with it so much because most of them have been playing that sport since they were, 8, 9, 10 years old. Bodybuilding is a little bit different in that way, where there's a lot of people that start bodybuilding maybe when they're 25, maybe when they're 30. Um, so I always find it interesting because you get some bodybuilders that have grown up playing sport and you can definitely see a difference in mindset on, you know, how they handle certain situations.
Yeah.
So it's always, these questions are always going to be context driven because obviously every person is not the same. But that's something that I do find is like you can generally see some of the bodybuilders you have to coach them in a way as if they're like a junior sports athlete because you're still teaching them lessons about competing, not necessarily the sport, but just how to be a competitive athlete and how to continue to get the best out of yourself. Whereas when you're hitting the elite levels, some of them definitely still need that, but also majority of them are a little bit more. They have more experience in those situations than some of the bodybuilders. So that's something that can be a major difference. And again, it's not all bodybuilders. There's some bodybuilders that are just elite, like mindset wise, just absolutely elite. But yeah, so it's one that sort of I didn't really think about when I was coaching bodybuilding that now I look at. I'm like, okay, like some of these athletes, even though that they're, 25, 30 years old, they haven't had that competitive experience. So we're still having to go back and, get them thinking in certain ways that, are going to help bring the most out of themselves rather than be, so focused on things that maybe don't even matter.
Yeah. I
What
do
do
feel like,
you?
oh
Oh,
yeah, no, you go,
I
you
was
go.
going to say, what do you find in the thing when you say things that don't really matter? What would you find like is some of the things that you notice in these athletes which are relevant?
I
And a
mean,
vague question.
yeah, like things like just so like anytime any sports club we've always had, we always have the controllables, which is I think it's a very, very standardized process of thinking that they use for sports athletes, which is going to be okay, put the list down of everything that you can control. We're going to master those things. And then if it's something we can't control, we're not going to worry about it at all.
Mhm.
Um, and just things like that where you may have like they're very different sports, whereas you can, look at in a say football, for example, you can look at another team's strengths, weaknesses, try to expose ways to beat them, and they're things that you can focus on. Bodybuilding's not necessarily like that. Like everything has to be on yourself.
Mhm.
So there are, you may have situations where people are focusing too much on who they're competing against, or those sort of things where it's like, in bodybuilding, it doesn't matter. Like you cannot focus on anything else other than yourself. Everything else is going to be a distraction. Um, So just situations like that, just like small things in those regards where it can be, and when you're dieting, like it takes mental energy away. Um, focusing and stressing out on things. Obviously, stress is not good for competitors, but like, just trying to bring their mindset back to things that they can control and work on to improve their physique and give them the best chance of winning rather than focusing on things that, who they're competing against has absolutely no relevance to what kind of physique you're going to bring to stage.
Mhm.
So I'd say that's probably the main one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it sort of leads back into like the whole feedback side of things, whereas it's like when you have an athlete who gets their judging feedback and they're sort of like, oh, but what do you mean? It's like I need to be fuller. It's like I'm as full as I can be, or just like whatever it is. And I know you've spoken about how the main difference between someone that's going to be an elite level bodybuilder compared to someone that isn't is the fact that they can sort of take that feedback on. And this sort of again is the mindset side of things where I feel like it's a big difference between someone who actually wants to be great and someone that just sort of I guess struggles a little bit more, and I think it does drive away from being a good bodybuilder is being able to take that feedback on board and just be like, all right, I've got to grow my back, sweet, let's just go hit it. Instead of like, oh, what do you mean my back is good? It must have just been the way that I was posing, or you know what I mean. So little
One
things
of
like that.
One of the things I've always said is I would generally judge, obviously, there's going to be like exceptions to these rules, but I generally would judge an athlete's potential and their mentality rather than the physique that they have. Obviously, there's going to be people on the further end of the spectrum where genetics are incredibly poor, where they might not match someone with incredible genetics who has a poor mindset. But I find for myself, that's where athletes fall short, is where they just don't have that mental fortitude, regardless of genetics. Because I've coached some really good genetic athletes before, like genetically inclined athletes before, who I've signed up and I've been like, this is going to be like, that one client that sort of gets all the attention and then takes you to the top. I'm sure you know what I mean by that, because everyone only cares about who wins. And then you get 6, 8 weeks into coaching them, and you realize, so this is why they're where they are, because you're seeing their progress photos for the first time, and you're like, Jesus, like this guy or girl could be a pro in no time, and then 6 weeks into coaching, it's like you're not going to hold up mentally, and I feel like that's a big concept which is overlooked from a potential perspective. Yeah.
100%. I
Mm.
think like, so one of the things that I always try to do and try to reframe back to coaches that I'll work with or clients is like, again, it's that whole controlling the controllable thing, but it's like, for me, it's like, if you focus on winning, you're going to be at the hands of judges. You're going to be at the hands of who turns up to shows and those sort of things. If you focus on trying to get somebody to their maximum potential, you're going to tick all of those other boxes. Uh, because if you can get somebody at their very best, it's going to give them the best chance to win.
Of course.
So
I've
like,
always Go on.
yeah, so like with some of those clients, right, it's like it turns into, all right, what can I do? And I 100% agree with you. And it's like, there are people that, I mean, you got to be realistic. Like there are some people that are going to win because genetically they're very, very good. But are they going to be the best that they can be? Are they going to push themselves as far as they possibly can be? And it's like, well, with a poor, with poor mental strength, probably not. And it's like, regardless of, yes, they might have won and it looks fucking great on social media and people notice that. But it's like, for me, I always look at it and I'm like, well, they're about 80% of where they could be because I know what their work ethic is like. Like I know we can get more out of them. And I think for me, that's what I enjoy about coaching is it's like rather I tend to I always call a bit of flack for this because I always tend to say like the wins are good, but they're just small chapters in an athlete. And like for me, it's like, all right, I want to get this person to their maximum potential because that's something that we can 100% control. And again, like I agree 100% with you there. And it's like, you get some athletes that are genetically gifted that never reach where they can actually reach due to mental performance. And then on the contrary, you can get some athletes that you would consider maybe aren't going to be genetically the best, but have incredible work ethic. And they may not win, but they may get to a position that is, what we would consider absolutely, an incredible result for them, which to me is just as important, if not more, because we're actually able to bring out that maximum potential of that individual. And I think that's how I look at coaching. It's like we're trying to, develop maximum potential from what we can work with.
There's two things I want to branch off to that there. It's cases where I've been at shows and I've been like excited and happy with more satisfied, I'll say, with an athlete who's placed fifth in a class than I have with an athlete who's placed second in a class or has been even won, because you do look at it as the individual who placed fifth is like, that's means we've got the absolute most out of them, where the individual who places that a little bit higher, it's a case where you've looked at them like you've said and been like, that's 80%, and you know that was within their control, or sometimes you know it was within your control, because yeah, it comes down to the plans you put forward, but it also comes down to managing the psychology of the individual and recognizing that, which takes time. One of the issues I see with really tapping the potential of an athlete is, I was having this discussion with my partner the other day as well, to get, especially a young male, I find, and to say to them, this is how long it's going to take, this is the process, this is how long I want you to stick by me, to have them to buy into that process for the duration of time which is necessary is very, very difficult. And I find this even more difficult with males than I do females. I feel like females are a little bit more trusting in it for the long haul, where males will jump at the next shiny object and they'll think they can get more. Where I'll talk from experience, I've had a handful of coaches, and no one coach has given me any more than any other coach. The only thing that's really resonated with me from one coach to another is finding a coach who I connect with and who understands me. But at the same time, I'm quite easy to coach in a sense, because it's pretty much just like, you put it down and I'll do it in all departments. But do you get what I mean by that as well?
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. I think um, a lot, and this is why I preach so much in terms of like good communication, because I have regularly will get inquiries from people that have done phenomenal.
Mm.
And then they want to come across, and it's like they didn't feel like someone was in their corner. They didn't feel supported. They felt like, those sort of things. And it's like, it's crazy to see like how often, um, if a client, in terms of buy-in, like if a client doesn't do well, but they feel like their best interests are being taken care of, they stay. Because you can figure out the rest of the stuff. Like if something went wrong in a prep, you with good communication, you guys can figure it out and never make that mistake again. And that's still progressing forward. Um, and I think the key, like breaking down what you were saying there, is like with the short term and long term, is I think it's also why it's so important to set things up in short term goals as long as long term goals,
Mm.
and be like, yeah, look, this is where we want to get to, obviously. But, coming back to the whole, we were speaking before, like the process versus outcome sort of thing. It's like, when you're only focusing on an outcome, it's the same as a general population person that's like wants to lose 30 kilos. And it's like, that might take a year, might take 2 years, whatever it is. But it's like, if you're constantly looking in the mirror every day and saying, I haven't lost the weight, they're going to be very disheartened. Whereas, if you work out and say, all right, we got daily goals that we want to try to hit. So our goal is to focus on the step count, whatever it is with training or nutrition or those sort of things. And it's like they're constantly winning because they're achieving something on a day-to-day basis. And then all of a sudden you're shifting that I'm trying to lose 30 kilos to I'm trying to do the things that are going to make me lose 30 kilos. And then the more wins they have, the more motivated they get. And then they can sort of they get that dopamine hit from their daily progressions. And then all of a sudden it starts becoming more about that. And then they kind of just get there, if that makes sense. So I think that's like a really important thing, and not just with males, but with females, with anyone, especially if they have a long goal, like obviously bodybuilding is, keeping them on track with those short-term goals is that's it's something that coaches all know and will do, but it comes down to how you communicate it, how excited you get for them when they achieve it, how much, emphasis you put on it when you're coaching them. And those are the sort of things that are going to determine whether coaches are, successfully doing their job well or not, because, you're always going to progress in bodybuilding, but like you said, it's a time game. So the better you get at keeping them on track, motivated, excited, create wins for them, obviously, the longer you're going to be able to work with them and the better the results that they're going to get and the closer you're going to get it to their potential. So for me, that's something that I'm absolutely huge on, and I 100% agree with you.
Mhm.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's when you do have those positions as well, I find that being with bodybuilding being so physique and look driven, I find sometimes with certain athletes that you do have, or people in general, it's just like you can struggle a little bit more to have those little wins as well. Because like, what I feel like the biggest one that a lot of people within bodybuilding don't get as excited for as they probably should is like progression in the gym, like progression in training. And I think a lot of people just they dictate everything based on the look and scale weight. No one really drives too much. Well, especially clientele. Like I know coaches do, but like clientele don't really look at a logbook and sit there and think, oh, like 10 weeks ago I was leg pressing this much and now I'm leg pressing this much or squatting that much or whatever. When I actually find that's probably one of the bigger drivers for like change within bodybuilding. And I
Mm.
feel like competitors just sort of take it for granted a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. But I mean, like, what's that phrase? You'll learn I'm a person of quotes. Like I use quotes all the time. This is coming back to the sports background, but it's like where your what is it? Where your where your thoughts go, energy flows, or something like that. Something I can't remember exactly what it is. But I think that's one of those things from a coaching perspective that, a lot of people, because the world is so like bodybuilding is and especially social media is so image driven.
Hmm.
It's very like they're always pulled to that. They're always comparing to people's photos. Like if they're not competing and there's a show, they're comparing to it. How often do you hear like, I don't look like that. I'm never going to be able to, those sort of things, right? So like it from a coaching point of view, it just becomes a matter of like what you're putting emphasis on for them because and what you're rewarding. So like if you're like some coaches will have this idea and it's like, they'll send a check-in photo in the off season and then everything becomes about the check-in photo, which is you need to do that. But like if you were to quickly go over that and then draw all of your attention to the progressions and talk about their training technique, give them that dopamine hit of being proud of them for hitting a progression in the gym or things like that, then their mindset sort of looks, it's like, okay, I'm being rewarded for the numbers in the gym. And then they want that dopamine hit. So they start, pushing more into that, and then that becomes a little bit more important to them. So I think a lot of it is just making sure like coaches can, you know, take away from that whole image-based side of things, which is very, very fucking hard to do. But like when you constantly are driving attention towards training progressions, exercise technique, those sort of things, that's where their brain starts to go. And I think again, that's another thing within communication. It's like having the athletes focus on what is important, like more important. And it's like that whole, again, process over outcome thing. It's like the physique is only the outcome. Like the getting the physique, looking at your physique is not going to change it. So it's like, okay, let's just put all of our energy into what's going to take to change it. So, and we know like how important, obviously, training close to failure with progressive overload is. So let's just drive all of our attention into that in the off season, so that their mindset can go straight to that. And then what it is, and then they start getting rewarded and you're, saying to them like, congratulations, this is great. You got an extra rep on this or whatnot. Then they're happy that they're getting celebrated. And then they're going to do that more, if that makes sense.
Of
Yeah,
course.
I was gonna say I find as well with it's hard. It's very hard with coaching with bodybuilding as well because like the outcome changes a lot of the time depending on what phase you're in.
Mm.
Because you do have comp prep and you have obviously your off season. It's like in comp prep, it's like realistically you do get rewarded on the look getting better. So I feel like from a dopamine perspective, it's like you look at yourself or you look at the client or whatever it is, and you're like, oh shit, you look better than you looked last week. So then I think that's what they get driven on. Whereas I do find you can still draw back to the training when you're in a prep
Mm.
because it's not just all, I guess, external. Like you're not just looking at it from
Yeah.
the outside, like this is what your physique looks like. I think you still do have to sort of draw back to those performance cues and just things like that as
Oh,
well.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, it just comes down to those things that you can control. Right? And it's like, I want to look better. Well, what can we control to look better? These. All right. So let's just focus on these things. Like it's, establishing what those things are so that the client always has something to go back to and look at and say, right, okay, I know it's this, or it's, you're not trying to emotionally go, oh, I need to be leaner. So I'm going to go all out now and do whatever. Okay, we know these are the things that it's going to take. So this is exactly what we're focusing on. So like establishing those things and regularly going back to them is absolutely vital, in getting the most out of a client.
I think as well, a lot of, as we know, because we've been in this game for a long time, scale, well, progression indicated by scale throughout a push phase doesn't necessarily indicate that you are progressing. And
Mhm.
not only that, we can see progression without seeing significant increments in scales. Like, for example, I've got completely different looks at two separate weights years apart. But if you looked at the processes, what went into it, where I was at from an input output standpoint, you would think that if you just looked at those numbers, that there'd been no improvement. But we can see improvements in a physique without having to push up 5 to 10 kilos.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's, yeah, the biggest thing comes back down to, for me, adaptations through training, consistency of training.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why it's always important to have more than one. And I think a lot of like general population people struggle with um, the reason that a lot of they have their weight issues is because they're focused on it's an easy number because it's a singular number, but then they look at it as up is bad, down is good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, and that's an important thing to it's always important to make sure that we tell clients we're going to have 4 or 5 different measurements and we're going to go with the averages, right? So like, it could be skin folds, progress photos, girth measurements, training performance, right? And you could look at it and go, okay, well, one of them isn't where we want it to be, but the other 4 are. So we're relatively good with that, right? And I think it's like when you don't have like a singular method, because everything has good and bad context. So I think it is like you say, it's one of those things where it's like you can, if you just judged it singularly by scale weight, it may look like you haven't made any improvements. But then when we add in 5 other measures, the other
Mhm.
4 are showing great improvement. So I think it's like it's good to have multiple areas of metrics of tracking a client's progression, and then just having the client have a really good understanding of what each one is, and then the pros and cons of each one. And then you can sort of go, yeah, well, look, this is down, but this could be because of X, Y, Z. But these other ones are really good, so it's probably showing this. And it's just a little bit more, gives the client a little bit more to think about, and then not obviously get, you know, weight's up 600 grams, fuck, I'm failing kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. Everything else is looking really good, so we don't actually need to worry too much about this because our trending metrics are all moving really well. So don't stress. Everything else will come.
Mm. Yeah, I find as well sometimes, especially particularly in like a growth phase or a building phase or whatever it is, whether it's lifestyle or like a competitor, I feel like I at the start I'll always give a rough estimate of like increasing body weight, but it's sort of for a different reason for what they're probably thinking, which is also hard in a sense if they realize what you're sort of tracking for. But it's like I feel like for a growth phase, you'll use the scale weight more of an indication of like the direction that you're heading from, I guess, a fat gain perspective, more than like, all right, we want to try and put on 200 to 300 grams a week. And it's like, yeah, if you say that to someone, I feel like they'll get really fixated on it and think it's like, okay, we're doing this to put on muscle. Whereas in actual fact, it's like, as rough around the edges as it sounds, it's like we're just using this as a gauge to make sure you don't get too fat, I
Mm.
guess, more than anything.
Yeah,
Um, so and it's right. And I feel like particularly with Gen Pop, they do marry the scales.
it's
Like
because it's an
anytime
easy
you have
number. It's just such a simple number to use.
yeah.
Um, that it's, again, and when they only use that one scale weight, like they just, you can not eat it all and it would be successful based off the scale. But then every other metric, it'll be horrible.
Yeah.
Have you done comp preps where you've had individuals consecutively lose weight but not see improvements in their look as well?
Yep, absolutely.
I've had some
Um,
like serious cases of that.
yeah. I've also had other ones where the scale has significantly increased and they've looked incredible, but
Yeah,
then
of course.
but they're mentally looking at the scale going, stressing out because it's like, shit, I'm 400 grams up. And I'm like, look at the photos. Like it's glycogen. Like it's literally water. You look incredible.
The
Uh,
hard spot for us too when that happens though.
what's that?
The hard spot for us as well when that's happening.
Oh God. Yeah.
Yeah, because you look at it and you know because you're looking at the visuals and you're seeing like, okay, cool, we either are seeing improvements or we aren't, whichever end of the spectrum we're going. But at the same time, for me anyway, I feel like I don't have that conviction in that case.
Mm.
One of the things that I've sort of recognized over the years as well, especially in the last couple, is in the context of prep. I don't want this to like be hypocritical to what we've been previously discussing, but in natural bodybuilding, there is going to be periods where you may see scale weight holds and we see improvements in looks, but eventually it is going to come down.
Oh,
If
100%.
there is an eventuality where it's not moving, it probably does reach a point where we need to take a step back and be honest and ask ourselves, are we seeing this athlete improve?
Yeah,
And I know that's
100%.
contradictory to everything we've been discussing, but important to recognize that there are going to be exceptions to the rule.
Yeah. And again, right, like if somebody is, 6 or 7 kilos off stage weight and they have higher body fat, like you're not growing that much muscle, or there's not going to be that much glycogen, water, anything like that that's going to mask that amount of weight loss. So there is going to be points where it's like, yes, you are heavier than what you need to be. Um, so, while we do track every other metric, the scale weight is going to be a very important metric as well. Like nobody looks 6 or 7 kilos off stage weight and then gets on stage at the same weight, looking perfect. Like that's not going to happen. So you can't disregard scale weight by any means, but you also don't want to uh, just look at it as up is bad and down is good, kind of. You know what I mean?
Of
So,
course,
like I said, it's always context dependent. I think
all so many moving parts.
yeah, exactly. Like you have to look at everything as like
Yeah.
it's like a car, right? It's like there's going to be, you need the wheels, you need the engine, you need the steering wheel. Like you can't take one of those things away and the shit's just going to work perfectly. Like you need to have a look at every single thing, and it all has to work concurrently to try to get from A to B.
Yeah, I found as well, just from like working with clients as well, like in the past, I find what happened to me was I was sort of marrying scale weight to like earlier on in the prep. So it's like you sit there and that's realistically like that's the best indication for
Mhm.
like rate of loss, right? Like you sit there, you look at the scale weight going down at the start of a prep because it's like, we're probably not noticing much in the look right now because you're still holding a substantial amount of body fat. So as that scale weight goes down, you sort of at the earlier days you're marrying that portion, but then eventually when it gets to a point where it does stall, and I find this is where it sort of leads back into that client mindset where it's like you get to a point you're like, okay, fuck, their weight's stalling. It's like, but the look's getting better. And it's
Yeah.
hard to convince the client of that because earlier on in the prep, it's like you were married to the scale weight. And it's like, okay, we're seeing the weight come down and eventually get to a point where there's no scale weight movement, but it's like, okay, the look's better.
Yeah.
But it's like you sort of have to convince them that that's now what we're looking at when they've been married to something else the whole time.
Yeah, and look, I think when you're doing that, like it's a lot of the mental stuff is like it's really hard to fix something on the spot.
Mm.
I think, and this is where a lot of people go wrong is like they'll have a client and they'll come to me and they'll say, my client is mentally looking at just the scale weight or something like that. What do I do? And it's like, well, if you've ingrained that into them for the last year, you can't just fix that immediately. Like this is something that you need to teach from day one so that they get used to it. So it's like if you do everything right leading into it, like scale weight is going to be a huge indicator, especially when they're at a higher body fat percentage, obviously, and especially in natural athletes, it's going to be huge. But like if you're able to continue to show the metrics that are getting better off of training performance, off of progress photos, off of girth, whichever other metrics that you choose, while you as a coach may be saying, yep, the scale weight's going down, that's probably the best indicator at a higher body fat percentage. But you can sort of, explain and go through the importance of the other ones, and still make a deal out of those so that when you're getting closer, it's not new to them.
Mm-hmm.
So like rather than saying, yep, your scale weight's going down, so that's what we need at this point in time, but then kind of leaving it there. Whereas if you're like, okay, so this is going well, progress photos are looking better, which is important, yada yada. Our training performance is getting a lot better, even though you're dieting, which is great. So if we can continue that, then obviously our output's going to go up, our retention of muscle is going to be better, and all this sort of things. And it's like just that constant reminding them and just showing importance of other things so that when it does get down to the end and it's like, okay, scale weight's not moving as much, or it's a little bit heavier. However, remember when I told you this is probably what's happening right now, but look at all your other measurements. They're, really good right now. And I think it's because of this, this, and this. And then they'll be like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I do remember you saying that. And like, so sometimes it's not about like right at the time. It's just about like how you work with them through the off season, how you work with them, at the starter prep and the things the way that you speak to them and what you put importance on. And then when you're able to do that, then when it does come down to it, when they're fatigued and emotional and tired and those sort of things, then it's familiar to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's really important that a lot of coaches sort of may miss the mark on. And it's like by the time it becomes a problem, it's very hard to fix because their mindset's like stuck in on like what could be scale weight or something like that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. It's I guess that sort of leads into again like the mental struggles of a client during prep, particularly when they do see a stall in progress.
Mm.
When that does happen, how do you sort of I know communication is probably going to be number one thing, but like how do you communicate this to I guess somewhat convince them that the stall's okay or it's normal? Because I know a lot of the time, especially with first time competitors as well, they struggle a lot more with that.
A lot of that sort of stuff is like, again, similar to what I was just sort of saying there is like, labeling importance on the metrics that we're training so that you can find wins. And I think this is one of the most important things, especially with first timers, is it's about finding wins. So like there's always going to be a win somewhere. And if it's a stall and scale weight, you've got four or five other things that you can celebrate, you can put attention into. And it's you almost use like what is it, like the sandwich analogy where it's like, your strength is going up, the weight's stalled, so we might do this just to continue to push it on. But also on top of that, this is going really well. Your energy is good or your sleep, something like that. So it's like the more wins they have, the more buy-in people generally have.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to, you know, be able to, like within the prep, is to be able to find as many wins as you can, because when people see like progression, then they tend to buy in a little bit more and they're a little bit more okay and they have more trust and those sort of things. So I think that's really important. And then on top of that, just like in the off seasons, right? Like, you know, education in the off seasons of what prep's going to be like, having a good setup plan, I think is really important, where it could be like, we're going to prep for 16 weeks because we want to lose 200, 300 grams a week. Plus we have 3 weeks where if something goes wrong, which, sometimes it does, then we have backup weeks, and then we have peak week, and then we have a diet break. And so it's going to be like 24 weeks. And then like you have that rough plan set up for them so that like if there is a stall and they start to stress out, you can be like, hey, remember how we have those 3 extra weeks? Yeah, well, this is why we did it, because this is completely normal. And then it just kind of calms them down a little bit. And so I think like just having plans set up so that and it's not necessarily like the plan has to be perfect, but it's like the more they understand, and then like the more problems that you think could arise in the prep, if you have done solutions and explained it to them earlier, it's much easier to refer back on something that we planned for than it is to have to adjust something on the fly, which could stress them out. So I think a lot of that stuff is actually predetermined in the off season, improvement season. And then just the more understanding they have, the better they're going to be, the less anxious they're going to be, and then the more wins you can show, the more they're excited they're going to be, the more bought in they're going to be, and things like that. So it's just little things like that where it's like, just be organized, educate them so they know what they're doing, and then always just try to find wins for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it's sometimes as well. I feel like it also depends on I don't know. I find it's hard as well because I feel like sometimes it depends on where the client was at when they started as well,
Mm.
mindset wise. Because, like you
Mm.
said, it's like if you set these standards within the off season, it's going to make everything sort of run a hell of a lot smoother.
Mhm.
But like that leads into another one where it's like off seasons. Like I feel like people don't take it anywhere near seriously enough. They don't treat it like it's like prep.
A
Like
show.
a lot of people have to realize.
Yeah, I mean I put up an Instagram post about that yesterday actually, and it went absolutely crazy. And it's very true, right? You can always like the hard thing is you have athletes that can get the stage and arguably do well without an off season.
Mm,
But again, this is also why I always try to put the focus on achieving your maximum potential, because you won't achieve your maximum potential like that. But unfortunately, we're in a sport with bodybuilding where genetics does play a very large role, um, where some people have done very well getting away with it, but they just kind of never get to where they could.
yeah.
Um, so again, it's one of those things where, you know, it's a very intrinsic thing for the athlete, because obviously you can't feed them and you can't train for them and those sort of things. But I think the best thing that a coach can do is just set smaller, shorter term goals in the off season, because nobody likes not achieving anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're just saying, oh yeah, we're going to do an off season and this is what we're going to do, if it's a 6-month goal, then all of a sudden, like they're like, I've got 6 months, so I can, it's not the end of the world if I go out and do this or do that. Whereas if you start setting up daily goals, if you start setting up weekly or monthly goals, that are going to put them in a challenging environment, then they tend to be more driven to do it. And it's about sometimes I always remember there in the AFL, they always had a thing in the off seasons of the AFL where it was like they constantly put them in environments where they were competing against each other. And it didn't have to be anything like physical, or it could be skills, it could be anything. But people don't like losing and they're competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, it's like if you let them compete in the weight room, those guys would go crazy. If you let them compete, with skills, and so like it's those sort of things where I like to sort of take what I learned from there back into bodybuilding, and it's going to be like, okay, so we need to challenge them. Like athletes perform their best when they're being challenged, all athletes. So, and then the more times they win, the harder they push. So if you set them weekly, fortnightly, day, whatever it is, goals, it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but enough that it's hard enough for them, like they're going to have to push to get it, but they're very achievable, then you find that it becomes less about the entire plan and it becomes more about, okay, like they're trying to win this week. Now let's string another week together. Let's string another week together. And every week may not be perfect, but if you have a 60-week off season and they're 45 out of 60, like achieving their weekly goals, that's far better than what majority of people are going to do. And then you can use those numbers to motivate them. You can say, all right, well, last off season, we set up your weekly goals and we had 45 out of 60. So we need to fucking beat that. And now they have a singular number that they're going to try to beat. And then you can get them, what the goal is completely context dependent to whatever that specific client is. But it's just about putting them in a challenging environment and seeing if they can win, and then setting up those small goals and then turning it into a bigger goal. It's the same thing as like trying to lose 200 grams a week over like a 10-kilo weight loss sort of challenge for a gen pop person. But you just change the goals to bodybuilders, and the elite bodybuilders are fucking competitive, right? And they're going to be if you challenge them, they're going to push to get it. And if you do that enough, short term enough, and let them win enough, it's pretty incredible what you can actually achieve in the long term just by setting those smaller things up.
What do you normally do for these little goals? Like what would be something that you'd set out for someone?
For bodybuilders or gen pop or
Bodybuilders normally.
bodybuilders, yeah, look, just small things. Like it could be, depending on the person, it could be getting your protein intake for the day, getting a training performance goal in. Could be a step count. It could be, you know, how many serves of protein it is in a day, those sort of things. So like they're not like overly tough or crazy challenges, but if you can string 4 or 5 of them together where it's like, all right, you nailed protein. Let's have a look at, and this is like for first timers, and it's like, okay, now let's look at nailing protein, carbohydrates, and fats within 5 grams. And let's see if we can string that together over 7 days. And then now all of a sudden it's like those, oh yeah, I'm going to go out to eat for dinner tonight. They're all just sort of going out. It's like, fuck, I don't want to lose this challenge. So it's just simple little things like that people kind of just don't really think about. But they're huge, right? Like if you think about it as yourself as an athlete, if you're challenged to do something and your coach puts you in a position that's like, I want to see you do it. Like this is the goal. And if you want to be your best, then this is something you're going to have to do. And you challenge them, and then reward them and say, like make a big deal of it, then something like that can work amazing. And it's like if you get that could stop 20 in an off season, 20 blowouts, right? That could stop going out and drinking 7 or 8 times in a prep. And it's like it comes back to that thing. It's like, all right, we're just going to do everything we can to make it as good as possible. And when you add all those things up, it makes a big difference, right? And it's because their training gets better because they're not they're just more dialed in on the day-to-day things. And then all of a sudden it's like they're competing with a weekly challenge, but this is going to bring another 5% to their physique, which is the outcome goal. So we're just taking things from, we're in the off season trying to grow muscle to, all right, we need to do all these little things. And it's like the process gets better and then the outcome gets better just as a byproduct of that.
I
Mm.
think as coaches as well, we don't recognize the buy-in that the athletes can have into us,
Mhm.
whether that be
Yep.
gen pop or bodybuilding or whatever it needs to be, to a point where I had one of my clients, just a gen pop client the other day, and he said every action he takes, he sort of thinks of me looking over his shoulder, which is obviously I sort of said to him, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but then I thought back to people that I've been coached by, and when it does come to the training sessions, when it does come to the nutrition, I do think that every decision that I make is like I do think of that. Maybe not every decision, but I do think of that. So to consider that the athletes are probably in the same position as I've mentioned, it makes it probably recognize the importance of the role that we play. And sometimes I think it's important as well that we do take a step back and we do provide not only the fundamentals of the programming through coaching, but that kind of incentive to keep them moving as well. Because I do want to feel like they're getting value with every check-in on a daily basis, whatever it might be. They do want to feel like there's something they're working towards. Obviously, there's going to be some people where you can't give them much, just due to adherence-based issues. But as well, some of the time that's going to come down to us when there's adherence-based issues.
A lot of the time, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I always try to take blame of it, or even if it's not my fault.
Same as me.
Deep
Yeah.
down, I'll know, but I will always try to take blame if something, if they're not doing something, it's like, fuck, I need to learn how to explain this better,
Yeah.
or I need to strip it back even further and then build it back up. Like maybe where they are now, it's not where I thought they were. So I 100% agree with you. I think it's so important to do that. And even like I have a quote that I always post from Martin Rooney, which is like the best coaches are blame takers and credit makers,
Mhm.
not the other way around. And it's like if you go in with that mindset and it's like, okay, well, this person is, adherence is not good. It's like, all right, maybe I've overshot and maybe I need to strip it back a little bit and find a smaller, easier goal for them. And then start there and then try to build it back up. So yeah, 100%. It is the buy-in thing. And like it's cool that you say that because I always tell people as well, like one of the things that while a lot of it's outdated, one of the things that I learned from Charles Poliquin about buy-in and importance for buy-in was especially with general population people, it's like if you do all the right things and you're like, we'll do a maintenance phase to see where you're at, and then we'll look into a small deficit or whatnot. Like if they don't get a result, they start losing faith in, they're doing all this stuff and then they feel like they're not achieving because it's such a big difference for them and they're doing it and they're not achieving their goals. So it's like I always like sort of tell people with like Gen Pop, it's like start aggressive
Mhm.
because if they lose a couple kilos in the first week, they will fucking do anything you want,
Yeah.
right? Like they are bought in, like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. And then you can maybe pull the calories up and like trying to tell them, we're gonna pull the calories up, you're still gonna be dieting, but you're gonna have more energy for training and whatnot. And it's like they're gonna be like, well, he knows what he's talking about because the first week I lost 2 kilos. And then all of a sudden, like, you can get them in the position that they want. So like that's another thing that's like really important with buy-in is like sometimes the perfect theory isn't going to work due to the person's mindset towards it. And it's like getting that buy-in is like that's the most important thing. Because once you do that, you have so many more tools available to use to try to get them results. So yeah, it's really cool that you brought that up because I think that's like
Mhm.
as you said, like, being able to buy in is one of the most important things on getting long-term results because again, like if they're not trusting completely in your ability, and like it's human nature, if they've trusted in you and a result hasn't come, they're going to question it.
Mhm.
Um, so like if you can get that right off the bat, then you
Mhm.
know you can maybe look at more optimal ways of doing things, and they're going to go, "Yep, I'm in 100%." Whereas if you try to start that from the start, maybe it doesn't work quite as well, and you've kind of lost them.
At the
Yeah.
same time, though, when we talk, if we're talking about like open high level bodybuilders as well, sometimes it doesn't work in our favor to, I'm sure you could to some degree relate. I do have cases where it doesn't necessarily work into favor of going down a specific route to get the buy-in because as competitive bodybuilders, especially of a potentially assisted status, it's important that every phase is done, in my view, as it should be done.
Mhm.
But in that case as well, would you have a specific way of potentially going about it? If you had a client that wasn't on board with that, would you still take that same approach where you'd go trying to find that to try to put it in a position where they are, okay, cool, I'm happy to do this?
Well, it depends on the athlete, right? Like you can't like If worse came to worse, yes, I would, because I know it's a very short-term thing that can lead to getting long-term adherence.
Yeah.
Um, and it doesn't have to be like it can be a week or two, right? You can do something. But like in terms of elite athletes are very coachable. They're more about, like I always sort of say, like developing athletes, like regardless if they're pro or not, that this is outside of that. I'm talking strictly from a mentality point of view. But like elite athletes, you just need to manage
Mhm.
because they have all these skills. They are bought in.
Mhm.
They're working with you because they've sought you out because they trust in you. Like your buy-in's already there. Um, so those sort of people, like you can look at in that regard and be like, yep, okay, this is what we're going to do. You know, they're going to have to buy in regardless. All you have to do is just to sort of explain the process to them a little bit and they're good to go. And then there are going to be people that are a little bit tougher to coach. And sometimes, it's hard to say this is what we're going to do, but you're not going to see any results for X amount of time. Like not like these metrics that you really want. We're not going to see any of them for a long period of time. Some of them will be great with it, but other people sometimes you do have to go. All right, there's going to be a very short-term trade-off, which I 100% agree is not going to maybe be the most like quote unquote optimal way. But if doing 2 or 3 weeks to get a little bit of buy-in is going to mean the next, 6 to 12 months they're good to go. For the risk to reward there for me is going to be there personally. But again, it's always so context dependent on the person's personality. Like I've worked with clients that I've had to go completely one way. I've worked with clients that I've had to go completely other way. You just sort of have to understand the client and their train of thought, and then sort of just use that to bring out the best in them.
Mhm, of course.
Yeah. I was gonna say with your one of the things that I've wanted to ask is you posted a quote a couple of weeks ago now, I think it was, and it was about um, not having a coach effort. So as a coach with clients, we shouldn't have to come in and coach your effort at the end of the day. But obviously, when you want to be at the highest level, it's super important, right? It's going to be, like you said, it's going to be that like, I guess, competitive edge that you get. Is when you're someone that's putting in more effort than everybody else, you're obviously going to get a lot better of a result. But do you think in any outlier of a circumstance that coaching someone's effort as an athlete is important?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on how we're going to define it, right? Because like if you look at if you look at athletes that you have to coach their effort, then we're having to look at training them, which is fine if they can do that, if you do that as a coach. But at the same time, like nobody's going to hit their max potential because you can't be there all the time for them. So I think that's what I'm talking about more of it in that regard. Like we can't do the training sessions, we can't eat the food, we can't sort of do those things.
Mm-hmm.
There will always be instances where, you have to push them mentally, or you have to, you can give them help in the gym or whatnot. But like at the end of the day, if an athlete wants to achieve their best, and hit their full potential, like you have to, as an athlete, you have to have that internal competitive drive with yourself to want to be better. And that's sort of in that regard of what it is. It's like you're just never going to, some people may win not doing it because, that's bodybuilding. But I don't define it like that. For me, it's going to be like if you want to actually get to your very best, I can't, you have to be able to want to get better yourself. Um, but again, right, like that's not to say if somebody came in and trained with you every day, would that make them even better? Yes. But at the same time, it's like if you don't have that internal drive to want to be your best, then it's going to be very hard for you to be your best.
Yeah.
And I have to feel like when people do ask for the accountability in that metric, it automatically tells me that they're not built for it in a
Mm.
competitive sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at achieving their highest potential, 100%.
Yeah, because I did, again, another conversation I had with someone the other day was around that there's never a point where I feel like I need to be kept accountable.
Mm.
It's all just process.
Yeah.
Process.
And I relate this back, right? Like when I look at professional, like I still work with a lot of professional basketball players and things like that. And I always Like when I look at them, and it's so fascinating to me because I'm in a position now where I get to still work with elite sports performance, and I get to work with elite bodybuilders. And it's so interesting, like the common traits between the two. And like bodybuilding can be a little bit hit and miss with those traits. Whereas I think in the sporting world, they're a lot more like you're always going to get your outliers that maybe, you're going to have to coach their effort. They've gotten there on pure athleticism or something like that. Very few though. But like it's so different because most of the athletes that play basketball, football, I'm having to pull back.
Mhm.
Like I'm saying, they're like they want to know what can I do to be better. Like and you can just tell them anything and they will go and do it, right? Whereas like bodybuilding could be a little bit more hit and miss with that. So like it's always kind of interesting. Like there's the pro sports players, like effort is something I have to pull back so they can recover.
Mhm.
And like that might be 95% of them. But then within bodybuilding, it might be 60% of them.
Mhm.
Right. And it's interesting. And I think it's just how the sport develops from having to, and again, when I come back to like what I was saying at the start is like, they've had to deal with so much stuff playing that sport since they were 8 years old compared to bodybuilding, where they may have only been doing it for 3 or 4 years. And it's just, it's a different mentality because they haven't experienced those things.
Mhm.
Um, and it's the same as, if you get a bodybuilder that has a sporting background, if they're genetically like if they're quite good genetically and they have that background of 20 years of competitive sport, they've learned the lessons of winning, they've learned the lessons of losing, they've learned the lessons of what it takes to get better. And some of the results that they can achieve are just fucking incredible. Like
Mhm. I do find a lot of the guys that have the sporting backgrounds do really well.
yeah, 100%. Like I have like a couple guys like in ICN, I've got a client, Paul Rucci, who's a very high level power lifter.
Mhm.
Um, and he crossed over to bodybuilding. Obviously, he's got a pretty good level of muscle mass. Probably structurally hadn't trained to be a bodybuilder.
Mhm.
The standard powerlifter physique with the overdeveloped traps, a little bit underdeveloped chest,
Yeah.
big shoulders, things like that. And he worked himself so hard, and he ended up going pro and winning a pro show.
Mhm.
And like to me, I watched that and I was like, he won that on effort.
Yeah.
He outworked everybody.
Mhm.
I got to watch it every single day, and it was like if there was something he could do to be better, he did it.
Mhm.
Um, and there's those sort of things, and it's like when you get, he's grown up playing soccer, he's grown up powerlifting, he's got a very performance-based mindset in the gym. Like he cares about, obviously with powerlifting, you have to care about the numbers, and I think that's something that powerlifters can take over into bodybuilding and be really good with. Is the numbers, you just have to get them training the right way, and then those numbers become vital for them. And those sort of things, like when you can see that in other sports crossing over into bodybuilding, it's like you realized how important it is to get everybody on that level because you can just achieve so much more with an athlete when their mindset is, um, I guess, like process/performance based.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important. I think it's like it's such an eye opener for me as a coach, and I've had a luxury of doing sports performance and being around elite level sports athletes. So I think for me, it's about bringing the mindset that those guys have um, across into bodybuilding. And it's like we can get another 20-25% out of every single one of these athletes if we get this stuff right. So that's why I'm so big on it.
I feel like a lot of coaches as well. This is a concept which I drew not long ago with these guys and just actually with a few others as well. If you actually reference when it comes to our ability to be coaches, we'll typically look at other coaches, we'll typically look at skill set, we'll typically look at some guys who are well known but can't necessarily coach. But if you model some of your work off some of the best sport coaches in the world, you get a whole different scope on things. And the thing that opened my mind to this is a little bit of a weird one. Sorry to go a little bit into it, but I saw an interview with Sam Mitchell. You know Sam Mitchell, Hawthorne Sam Mitchell. Yeah. Um,
100%.
and he was presenting in front of the VFL before he became an AFL coach.
Yep.
And obviously, I don't really know a hell of a lot about him, but I've obviously heard like that he is quite made for it. And watching the presentation to the team of the VFL team, you realize the difference. You realize how much more you can do for someone as an individual and their ability to actually tap their potential. For me, with my coaching specifically, I feel like it's not about necessarily getting the most out of an individual as an athlete, but it's about getting the most out of an individual in totality. Because a lot of the methodologies, or a lot of the ideologies that you portray are going to carry over to all parts of their lives. And I think if we can embody that to some degree, like these professional, like highly professional sports coaches do, we can get a lot more out of every athlete on all fronts.
That needs to be a reel that goes as a pin post on your Instagram.
Yeah, I think so
Right
too.
there. Yeah, that's one of the truest things. I generally look
Yeah.
when I look at coaching, I don't look at bodybuilding coaches anymore.
Yep.
If you want to learn how to be a good coach, look for sports coaches, 100%
Mm.
every day of the week.
Mm.
Their ability, like I always like you look at sports, you look at an AFL coach, for example, right? They're dealing with a bunch of guys that are really fucking good at their sport. They don't need to teach skills to those guys. Like they don't. NBL, NBA, AFL, whatever. They very rarely teach skills. It's about player management.
Mhm.
So junior athletes. So I always kind of have like a crossover here where it's like I look at junior sports athletes as amateur bodybuilders, first timers, things like that, where it's like you're still teaching them the skills of how to play, what to do, taking them through experiences because it's all brand new to them. When you're hitting the pro levels in like professional sport, you don't need to teach that stuff because they've done it for 20 years. So you need to be as a coach coaching the junior levels, you're teaching skills, you're teaching adherence, you're teaching how to navigate winning, losing, those sort of things, umpire calls, things like that. When you're hitting the pro levels in the professional sport, that stuff is done. Like those guys got there because they're good at that. Right now, it's just about player management. How do we get these guys to work together to get the most out of them? How do we, those sort of things. And it's like that's the stuff that in terms of like like bodybuilding, and when we're looking at elite athletes in bodybuilding, it's management of their phases, it's management of their prep, it's timing, making sure we're in fatigue, all those sort of things. So it's exactly the same, where you're not having to teach that effort, you're just managing what they're doing. So there's so many commonalities to it, and professional sports coaches are so good at managing people to get the most out of them. And there's so many books and so much information and so many talks that professional sports coaches do that bodybuilding coaches can learn from and use towards their elite athletes. And I think in the bodybuilding industry, it's like very sort of not narrow-minded. It's just like they haven't been exposed to it because there's a lot of people that do bodybuilding. We'll be realistic here. It's like they might start when they're 21 or 22 because they're insecure about how they look, and then they stay within the bodybuilding scope, and they're never really exposed to that sporting competitive side. And it's like if those people went to workshops from AFL coaches or the sort of coaches, there are so many takeaways that I'm not even going to argue it, it's a fact that would help them be a better coach more than watching what a bodybuilding coach is teaching on necessarily just the hard skills. Because it's like once you have the hard skills, it's about using them as good as possible, which is about managing the athlete. And I think like, coaching elite athletes in bodybuilding, like if you can ask any coach that it's management of the person. Um, and I think, yeah, like you just said there, like you absolutely nailed that. Whereas it's like looking at sporting coaches, like one of the Damian Hardwick.
Yep.
Damian Hardwick is on so many podcasts on Spotify talking about these things. And like there are some of them there that are just like so many golden nuggets of information on how to deal with, players and caring about the players so that they feel like, saying things like, for example, I'll go on a bit of tangent here, but like saying things like you can only be as hard on an athlete as much as they know that you care.
Hmm.
So like you have to do it on an equal balance to get the most out of them. So it's like, things like understanding the athlete and understanding where they're coming from and empathizing with them. Because if you don't, you just like seem like you're attacking them.
Of course.
You can push them far harder when you understand them and they believe that you understand them. So it's like things like that where it's like, understand where they're coming from, ask questions, because when they do down the track, when it comes time push to shove, these are all things that you can use to bring out the best in them. Whereas if you're not doing that, and you don't know anything about the athlete, then
Mhm. Of
it's gonna feel like an attack for them.
course.
So like things like that, like that's just one example. But like things like that, I think are just golden nuggets for not training and diet, but for what I would consider like coaching, like
Mhm.
getting the most out of an individual. So I think like what you just said there is like would make 95% of coaches 50% better coaches,
Mhm.
just by doing that.
Yeah, of course. Agree.
Yeah, understood. I feel like even with yeah, I feel like a lot of I've heard there's heaps of stuff to say with NFL coaches to
Hmm.
look up heaps of stuff from them because apparently
But
they're
on
on another level, especially because it's the actual coaching side of things within the sport is so intrinsic because there's so many different like teams that you sort of have to organize. Um, and yeah, I've just heard heaps about NFL coaches that
yeah, they're incredible, like absolutely incredible. You
They're
can learn
also yeah,
from
they're also in a position where they need to be. They need to be better than like an AFL standard level coach because the security of the position, to my knowledge, is quite poor.
and
If
like
yeah, if they're not getting results or they're not liked by the team, they're out.
yep, 100%. And
Yeah.
you also have to like remember here, and this is another concept I talk to people about, is like bodybuilding is like a hobby for majority, like 95% of people, bodybuilding is a hobby, right? So they're there because they enjoy doing it. They
yeah,
don't have to be there. Their life doesn't change if they stop, right? So now imagine adding the pressure of if you're not performing well, you lose millions of dollars
Mhm.
yeah,
as an athlete. Now imagine from a coach's point of view, the pressure it puts on you trying and the stress it puts on you trying to get for your own job for millions of dollars, but you're also essentially like if your players aren't playing well, you need to work out how to get the best out of them. Their livelihoods are on the line there.
Of course.
So how much it takes for them, and this is going a little bit off topic, but like how much it takes for them to be able to manage, these people are all millionaires, like multimillionaires. They're young multimillionaires. They have, you have to deal with egos. You have to deal with all of these sort of things on these guys. And it's like, they're used to being the best in the world everywhere they go. Like they grew up in high school just dominating football games, right? They have egos, and you got to be able to manage that stuff,
Mhm.
right? To get guys to work together. It's hard. And like they're the problems you face in elite sport, not necessarily like, can we kick in fucking handball? Like we're trying to deal with these things. And it's like when you get to elite level bodybuilding, we shouldn't have to be dealing with, you know, um, oh, I didn't feel like going to the gym today, or any of those things. Like these are the topics. Like, and if you can learn from people that are so damn good at managing those sort of things, then all of a sudden, like you realize bodybuilding coaching is not like maybe as complex as
I think it
it's.
is.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's like if you can, just take a few things from these guys, bodybuilding coaching becomes relatively straightforward.
Yeah,
Of course. Yeah. And yeah, it is important as well because I often say to people as well with especially with Aussie rules football, their careers are so uh I can't think of the word. I'm gonna say volatile.
Mhm.
But if they aren't, you need to think a lot of these young guys will put everything on hold to pursue a career in football. If a coach isn't getting the most out of that footballer in 5, 6, 7 years, there is a chance that they go from like a 400, $500,000 a year salary, which don't get me wrong is good, to zero.
Mhm.
So that emphasizes the importance of delivery on the athlete's end and the coach's end. And it's not so much because obviously then they go back to a normal paying job, but it's more the fact they've gone from being in the limelight, doing what they enjoy, making good money to do it, to just well, in their eyes, it's probably a nobody.
Yeah.
It's just normality. And
And
that's where, yeah.
And even though that's like sounds like far-fetched compared to like talking to bodybuilding, right? But it's like, well, if we reiterate this back around and it's like, bodybuilding coaching, if you're great and you're learning from people that have to deal with those sort of situations day to day, they have some experience that like you can use 1/50th of what they do,
Mhm.
and you're gonna get the most out of a bodybuilding athlete.
Of course.
So it's like it's so important to like there's so many facets to coaching. And
Mhm.
it's like, I think a lot of people just look at the training and diet.
Mm.
Uh, And it's like, coaching is getting the most out of a person. The rest of it's kind of just the tools that you're using to do it.
Mhm.
So it's like I think a lot of people neglect the soft skills to focus solely on the hard skills. And then they may lose clients because they're not getting buy-in, or the clients are, oh, my client doesn't stick to what they're doing and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, if you're getting those situations, then your issue is probably not the hard skills. Your issue is probably how you're dealing with the client and getting the most out of them. And to reiterate it, all the way back where it sounds off topic with like the NFL and AFL, it's like those are the guys that just master this.
Mhm.
So like not just learning from bodybuilding coaches, learning from basketball coaches, AFL coaches, NFL coaches, all this. And there's so much information out there on that stuff as well. And it's just so
Yeah.
good because like it may sound like it doesn't relate to bodybuilding directly, but like it's still coaching. You're still trying to get the most out of people. And there's still ways that they do that and explain it that for bodybuilding is priceless.
Mhm. Agreed.
Yeah, 100%. All right, man, that was perfect. It was good. I think we're on an hour mark.
We're about an hour and 10, so pretty much perfect, man. Yeah.
Appreciate you coming on, man. That was really good, actually. It's good. I feel like it's something different as well to what I feel like normally we talk about too. I feel like the coaching side of things, a lot of time we talk based on like athletes and things like that. So being able to talk from like a coach's perspective too, and what other people can do, because I know there's a lot of coaches, and it's probably more athletes that listen to the podcast as well, but like it's at least something that other coaches can listen to and really, I guess, grab from.
I think for
Mm.
coaches, this is a very valuable listen.
Yeah, for
Mm.
sure.
That's
Yeah.
my goal. So
But yeah,
hopefully you guys enjoyed it and I didn't ramble on too much because I have a
nah, man,
tendency
That's
it's
to
what we
do
good.
that.
like. That's what we
We
like.
like we like when
Yeah.
the guest rambles. It makes it better.
Yeah. Much easier.
I'm
So
very
it's good.
passionate
But,
about that.
yeah. Do you have anything you want to plug, man? I know you've got a podcast. You got a few things.
Yeah, well, I got a podcast that we run. I do like it's very sporadic. It's not a weekly podcast. I kind of do it when there's a topic that I feel needs to be addressed. And we'll go on and it's a little bit different. Like I'll put on if I put on bodybuilders or I put on like I've got like the performance psychologist for professional sports teams that I jump on there and
Mm.
talk about like ways to get the most out of people. I've got a lot of professional basketball players that come on and talk about their journeys, bodybuilders that come on, and then obviously having Dr. Mike and all those guys talking about the hard skills of training. So it's a very mixed bag podcast. But we got about 16, I think, episodes on there, which is really cool. It's called the Physique Decoded. You can check that out on Spotify, or I think it's on what's the other Apple Music? Is that the other one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, what that
Apple
one, I think it's
Music.
on there too. Yeah. Other than that, yeah, if you guys have any questions about the podcast, and I try to be the fastest replier in the world on social media.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you guys have any questions about the episode or anything like that, then you can shoot them over at my Instagram. I'm more than happy to talk shop. I can do that all day.
Perfect, bro.
The best thing is I know plenty of people that are listening to this. People that reshare your little black tiles. So.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, some of them go. I think sometimes they'll go up to like 1,000 reshare. I have to turn the notification.
Really? I
Yeah,
wish. Yeah.
yesterday's one got to like 1,000. It was crazy.
Yeah, that's great. How many followers do you have?
15,000
Yeah,
maybe
okay. That makes
somewhere
sense.
around there. Thunder. Yeah, I'm not too sure.
I think it was about 100. Yeah. But I have 5,000 followers, not 15.
Hey,
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate you taking your time out as well.
yeah, cool. Glad to be here. I had fun, so thanks for that.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.